Hello and welcome to another edition of ChinnyVision. Today we're looking at Space Harrier 2. Space Harrier was of course an arcade smash in the late 80s, came out in 85 but really didn't hit the arcades in this country until 86. Now Space Harrier 2 never actually was originally in the arcades. It was destined to come out on the Sega Megadrive as one of the launch titles, or fairly close to the launch anyway. It did actually end up in the arcades. I saw it myself down in Littlehampton as part of a kind of 6-in-1 arcade machine, but it was actually just a Megadrive in an arcade machine, so it felt pretty ripped off. It wasn't a kind of original Space Harrier 2, it was just a kind of console that you could have played anywhere. So does Space Harrier 2 on the Megadrive stack up? Well, let's have a look. The first thing that strikes you when you load up Space Harrier 2 is actually you don't just have to start on level 1. You can select any of the levels apart from the very final kind of boss showdown level. So you can kind of scroll through these different levels and start in different places. This kind of adds a bit of variety to the gameplay, because if you get bored kind of starting off at level 1, you can jump in somewhere else and see different parts of the game. As you can see, the checkerboard kind of ground moves along quite fast. It's not kind of as fast as the arcade original kind of Space Harrier 1 was, and yeah, it's slightly lacking in the size of the baddies, but it's not too bad. Could they have done better on the Mega Drive hardware? Possibly, but then again, it was only a new console out, so they're kind of still getting to grips with the hardware. You do kind of get these really good end-level baddies, a bit more variety in the original game as well. This giant tortoise thing here kind of firing at me. Fairly easy to defeat. You get a kind of different variety of these baddies as you go through the game. The thing that actually strikes you most about Space Harrier 2 though is it's not as good a game as the original Space Harrier. They've seemed to have wanted to make greatest hits of the original game and not quite got there, partly because the hardware isn't quite up to it. The original arcade hardware had two 68,000 processors, whereas the Mega Drive only has one, so the Mega Drive can't really do all the kind of fancy tricks that the arcade original could, or Space Harrier 1 in the arcade could. Therefore it kind of leaves you wishing you were actually just playing the arcade version, and you just end up feeling that this is almost a supermarket own brand version of Space Harrier. And there's also a few kind of gameplay faults as well in some places, in that it's not as well designed as the original game. The sprites aren't quite as nice. They look very 2D in places, and Space Harrier kind of original graphics were, I know they were 2D, but they didn't necessarily look like it. These pillars here just look like kind of giant blocks coming at you. And now we end up kind of doing this kind of hole in the wall thing where we've got to avoid the pillars, and you've got other things going on and firing at you. It just becomes a bit much, not very fun, and it's all a bit substandard, not quite good enough. When you can play other games in the Mega Drive that are better than this, why play this, even back in the day? And the way the game kind of suddenly speeds up like that. Now the original did that, but not quite as viciously as the Mega Drive version does, and you're kind of now playing this hole in the wall thing where it's almost completely unfair, because you're trying to dodge enemy lasers whilst going through the gaps. And you think this is a bit crap, really. Speaking of being a bit crap, there were some interesting ports to the home systems, of which we're going to look at a couple. The Amiga and ST version are pretty much the same as the Mega Drive, almost. The home versions were by Grand Slam, not Elite as the original. Grand Slam not exactly renowned for some of their quality titles, and here we have the Amstrad version. And the original version on the Amstrad, as you may remember, was by Elite and had vector graphics and moved along at quite a pace, really. It got round some of the problems you're going to have of porting Space Harrier to the Amstrad. Likewise, the Spectrum was pretty good, pretty fast, didn't have any music, 48K only. And the Commodore 64 version, well, yeah, that's better best forgotten, really. So here we are with Space Harrier 2 on the Amstrad. And the first thing that you kind of see is you've got solid sprites. No vector graphics this time, we're in mode 0. And we've got this kind of fairly funky music going on in the background. It is, however, incredibly slow. None of that speeding up you see on the Mega Drive. Well, actually, you do get some speeding up, because when there's a lot going on, the game slows down and then speeds up again. That's not actually intentional. That's just the hardware not being able to, not necessarily being able to cope. It's also partly poor programming, I expect. The sprites jerk towards you, enemies appear and disappear. There's kind of some fairly bad scaling problems, and also baddies sometimes appear and out of the blue and hit you, giving you no chance to avoid because they just kind of come off the edge of the screen. It's not a lot of fun. It's got all the kind of enemies and baddies that the Megadrive version has, but when you're copying a flawed game and then doing it on more limited hardware, the result is always going to be fairly disappointing. Oh, here we can see the Hot Palace level, which is the final one you can select, although not the final level in the game. And again, you kind of got these 2D pillars coming towards you, some sprites kind of going between the pillars. Are they in front of them? Are they behind them? Who knows? And it's all a bit tepid and slow, so it's a pretty poor quality conversion for the Amstrad. I don't think this even came out on budget, which says a lot, really. Now onto the C64 version. Got a loading screen here with a man with peculiar legs and buttocks. Again, you can select the levels, and oh dear, this is my Commodore 64 loading an image I downloaded online, and I've got no sprites, nothing anywhere. So what we're going to have to do, I'm afraid, is go and load this up on an emulator, which goes against what we do on this channel usually. But I can't find an image anywhere that actually plays properly on my Commodore 64. So here we are with the emulated image. I've kept the original Commodore 64 music running in the background because actually it's one of the best things about the game. It's a really nice tune, really beefy, sounds really nice through the SID. And as you can see, similar problems to the Amstrad version. It's speedier, but you've still got these kind of ludicrously small sprites, and the dragon here is just laughable. The sprites jerk towards you, and is it better than the original Commodore 64 version of Space Harrier 1? Well, frankly, poking your own eyes out with a rusty spoon is better than the original version of Space Harrier 1 on the Commodore 64, because it's terrible. It's a terrible, terrible abomination of code. And I can't believe some C64 owners even try and defend it because it's crap. This, on the other hand, it's not a bad effort. It could be better, the sprites could be larger, but it does have a really kicking tune. But it's one of these kind of games that the C64 is not terribly good at doing, and it's always going to be a little bit rubbish. So, Space Harrier 2, slightly rubbish game on the Megadrive. You're much better off playing the original Space Harrier on MAME if you can. Space Harrier 2 is just a game that is lacking. It's lacking on the Megadrive. It's just not good enough. The hardware isn't quite up to it, but critically the gameplay isn't anywhere near as good as the original Space Harrier. Even when you play the Spectrum and Amstrad versions of the original Space Harrier, the gameplay still shines through. And on the Master System as well, and the other consoles, and even the new Atari XL version, for those of you who've got 128k in your Ataris, is really good. Space Harrier 2 is just, you don't get that. It's a lacking game. They've thrown in all sorts of different things. Doesn't quite hang together. The Mega Drive version, cure its egg really, worth looking at, but you're not really going to want to play it for too long. Home versions, utter rubbish. Avoid. If you want to play Space Harrier, go and play it in MAME because it is an all-time great. Space Harrier 2, well, really, it's not even Space Harrier 0.5.